Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases in Missouri history. Before we start, please tell us in the comments where you're watching from and when you're listening to this narration. We want to know where and when these reports are being read. It was the year 1867. The American Civil War had only ended 2 years before, and the country was still hurt and trying to heal. Most people in the rough, remote hills of the Missouri Ozarks were just trying to put their lives back together. Back then, roads were simple dirt paths that connected small settlements in the wilderness. Travelers could spend days going through these hills, and after sunset they were grateful to find safe places to sleep. There was a small cabin along one of these roads, about 17 miles northeast of Springfield in Webster County. Many travelers remembered passing by it. There were no signs on maps, but people in the area called it the Stillwell Place after the two brothers who moved there around 1863. The cabin was about 50 yards back from the road and was partly hidden by a group of oak trees. A small hand-painted sign said, "Water and rest for weary travelers." Elias, the older brother at 37, and Jeremiah, the younger brother at 34, were known to give people passing through water from their well and sometimes a meal or a place to sleep. They mostly stayed to themselves, but they did go to the nearby town of Marshfield to get supplies from time to time. People who lived nearby said they were quiet and didn't cause no trouble. The brothers came during the war, when things were very chaotic, and like many others who came during that time, few people questioned where they came from or what they had done in the past. On the 12th of December, 1867, a postal worker named Thomas Weston was on his route through Webster County when it started to snow heavily. He told county officials later that he had gone to the Stillwell cabin for shelter, just like he had done twice before. What he found there would lead to one of the most disturbing investigations in Ozark history. Even though it was looked into at first, it would be considered an unsolved cold case for almost a century. This is a documented account made up of county records, articles from the Springfield, Missouri Weekly Patriot, personal testimonies, and evidence gathered by the Webster County Sheriff's Department in 1867 and 1868. During a courthouse renovation in 1952, some records were found that added to what was already known. No one knew that the Stillwell brothers were giving travelers something much worse than water as the winter of 1867 settled over the Ozarks. Their kindness hid secrets that would haunt Webster County for a long time. Thomas Weston's postal route took him to some of the county's most remote areas. He was 31 years old and had been a scout during the war, so he was used to the hard work on the trail. That December afternoon, it was snowing heavily, and it was hard to see. He later said that he almost missed the turn to Stillwell Place. He only saw it when his horse stopped suddenly near the path. Weston wrote in his report that the cabin looked different in some way. There was no smoke coming from the chimney, even though it was cold, and there was no lantern in the window like there usually was. He moved slowly, noticing that there were no new tracks in the snow, which seemed strange to him. In the winter, the Stillwells didn't leave their property very often. Weston said he yelled several times before trying the door, which he found was open. The inside was dark and colder than usual. There was a half-eaten meal on the table, and the food had frozen. There were only cold ashes in the fireplace. Weston said that the silence was the most striking thing. "It was so quiet that it made my ears ring," he wrote. There was no sign of the brothers in the cabin. Their coats were still hanging by the door. Their rifles stayed on the wall above the fireplace. It looked like they had just disappeared in the middle of eating. Weston was worried and didn't know what to do, but he decided to keep going to Marshfield to tell Sheriff James Harrington about what he had found, even though the weather was getting worse. At first, it was easy to think that the brothers might have gone hunting and gotten stuck in the storm. They might have gone to see family who lived nearby. But the sheriff was worried enough about the meal that was left behind to put together a search party the next day. The mystery began when they didn't find what they were looking for. It would only get worse over time. The Stillwell brothers came to Webster County in the summer of 1863 when the war had turned the Ozarks into a lawless frontier. Missouri, a border state with people who were loyal to both sides, had some of the worst guerrilla fighting of the war. In the midst of all this chaos, Not many people were surprised when two brothers bought a piece of land and built a cabin. Land records found in 1952 show that Elias and Jeremiah Stillwell bought their land from a widow named Margaret Holloway. Her husband had died in the Battle of Wilson's Creek. It was strange enough that they paid in gold coins that it was noted in the deed. The brothers said they were from Kentucky, but they didn't say much else about their past. After Martha Simmons died in 1881, her personal belongings included a journal in which she wrote about the brothers. At the time, she ran the general store in Marshfield. "The Stillwell men are quiet, but they always do the right thing," she wrote. The younger one, Jeremiah, is always looking at the door and acting nervous. The older one speaks for both of them most of the time. They buy a lot of coffee, salt, and other things that help preserve food. When I asked, Elias said they smoke meat to last the winter, but I never saw them buy much livestock. The brothers quickly became known for giving travelers clean water. Their well, which was deeper than most in the area, gave them cool, clear water, even when it was dry. In less than a year, they had built a small lean-to shelter where travelers could rest if they needed to. By 1865, they sometimes served meals for a small fee or in exchange for goods. In January 1868, Jacob Miller, a cattle driver who often used the road, gave a statement that helps us understand how the brothers ran their business. They'd have stew ready most days. Good, hearty stuff. Said they hunted their own meat. Never saw them do much farming, though they had a small garden patch. The older one, Elias, he'd make conversation while the younger one tended to the horses or fetched water. Looking back, I can't recall ever seeing any other travelers there when I stopped, though they spoke of having many visitors. The Stillwells seemed to exemplify the frontier hospitality necessary for survival in such isolated regions. Their business was small, but it was a nice place for people traveling the hard road between Springfield and points northeast to stop and rest. There was nothing wrong with the way they acted that could be seen. But after the brother went missing, a thorough search of their property would show that the peaceful image they had built up was not as solid as they thought. On the 13th of December 1867, Sheriff Harrington's search party got to the Stillwell property. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the ground with 8 inches of clean white snow. 6 men, including the sheriff and Thomas Weston, looked over the cabin and the area around it very carefully. The official report, which was found during the 1952 renovation and filed with the county clerk, said, "No signs of struggle within the dwelling. Brothers' personal effects appear undisturbed. Unusual discovery of ledger book beneath floorboard under Elias Stillwell's bed. Book contains names, dates, and notations of value received, though meaning unclear. Some pages appear to have been removed." This ledger would become a key piece of evidence, even though its full meaning wasn't clear right away. There were 37 entries in it, each with a name, date, and strange notes about things of value. The entries were from October 1863 to November 1867. Some entries had a simple X next to them. The search included the property's outbuildings, which were a small barn, a smokehouse, and a storage cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin. There was 1 mule and signs of at least 2 horses in the barn, but they are now gone. The searchers first thought that the cuts of meat in the smokehouse were venison or pork. The cellar was where the first truly disturbing discovery was made. Sheriff Harrington's report says, "The root cellar goes about 15 feet into the hillside. The wooden shelves hold preserved goods like those found in a normal household. However, the back wall looks like it was just dug up, revealing a narrow tunnel. The tunnel goes another 27 feet and ends in a chamber that is about 8 feet by 10 feet in size. The chamber has a lot of personal items in it, like watches, rings, clothes, and papers. They all seem to belong to different people. The most worrying thing they found was 32 pairs of boots and shoes of different sizes, some of which are very worn and others that look almost new. The large number of personal items made it seem like they had been collected over a long period of time. None of the things looked like things that the Stillwell brothers were known to own. It was clear what the implication was. These things had probably been stolen from other people, probably travelers who had stayed at the cabin. However, no bodies were found, no blood evidence, or anything else that could prove that violence had happened. The most damning proof was circumstantial. Why would the brothers have a secret room full of things that don't belong to them? The search party worked harder going through the woods around the area and checking the well, but the heavy snow made things harder. Sheriff Harrington ordered the property to be locked up and guards to be posted to keep people from tampering with possible evidence. He then went back to Marshfield to plan a more thorough investigation. Word got around the county very quickly. The Stillwell brothers' strange disappearance and the discovery of the secret chamber made headlines. The Springfield, Missouri Weekly Patriot ran a front-page story on December 17, 1867, with the headline, "Strange Disappearance in Webster County. Foul Play Suspected." As winter's grip tightened on the Ozarks, residents began to recall details about the Stillwell brothers that had seemed insignificant before, but now took on sinister overtones. The Stillwell cabin was empty and quiet all winter long in 1867-68. Sheriff Harrington locked it up and patrolled it often, but not many people from the area went near it after rumors started to spread. Even though it was the busy season, the investigation went on, with Harrington talking to everyone who had done business with the brothers. A closer look at the ledger book that was found under the floorboards gave the first real clues. Each entry had a name, a date, a note about valuable items like watches, coins, a nice coat, etc., and sometimes information about where the person was going. Entries with a X had an extra note about the quality of the goods. The last entry, from the 29th of November 1867, said, J. Hammond, Springfield Merchant, gold timepiece, $37 notes, quality goods X. Sheriff Harrington checked these names against reports of missing people and found a number of matches. Joseph Hammond's family did say he was missing after he didn't come back from a business trip to Street Louis in late November. He was a merchant in Springfield. In the same way, William Cooper, who is mentioned in an entry from July 1867, went missing while on his way to visit family in Springfield. These matches had scary effects, but they were still just coincidences. It was still hard to prove that the Stillwell brothers were involved in disappearances without bodies or witnesses. Sheriff Harrington carefully made a list of all the travelers who were reported missing along the routes near the Stillwell property in January and February of 1868. The list eventually grew to 23 names, all of which were from late 1863, not long after the brothers had moved to the area. One name on the list stood out: Reverend Michael Donovan, a circuit preacher who was known to travel around the Ozarks. He went missing in April 1866 while traveling from Springfield to Lebanon. Man of cloth, silver cross, few coins, books of no value, X. His name was written down in the ledger. Reverend Donovan's congregation in Lebanon had searched high and low for him when he didn't show up, but they couldn't find him. Finding his name in the ledger led to a new search, this time concentrating on the areas around the Stillwell property. During a short thaw on the 23rd of February 1868, Sheriff Harrington's deputies found a shallow grave about half a mile from the cabin, hidden in a thicket of brambles. There were the bones of a man in the grave who was wearing ripped-up clerical clothes. The ledger entry said there was a silver cross, but it wasn't there. Finding Reverend Donovan's body was the first solid proof that the Stillwell brothers had something to do with at least one disappearance. But the state of the remains raised some troubling questions. Dr. Hayes's examination notes say, the body showed signs of extensive post-mortem processing. Flesh was carefully removed from most of the bones, which suggests knowledge of anatomy. Long bones were broken at the ends in a way that was consistent with marrow extraction. This horrible discovery pointed to something much worse than just robbery and murder. It hinted at actions so horrible that even tough frontier lawmen didn't want to think about what they might mean. Sheriff Harrington set up a full search of the property in March 1868 when the ground had thawed enough for more digging. According to county records, 20 men took part, digging up areas around the cabin, barn, and cellar in an organized way. The official report used medical language to describe what they found, but the newspapers were more clear. The 19th of March 1868 issue of the Springfield, Missouri Weekly Patriot said, "Grim discovery at Stillwell Farm. Human remains unearthed." The official record says that investigators found human remains in 3 places on the property: in a deep pit behind the barn, scattered in the woods about 200 yards northwest of the cabin, most disturbingly, sealed inside the walls of the smokehouse. In 1868, forensic science was still very new. However, Dr. William Hayes, the county doctor who looked at the remains, thought they belonged to at least 7 different people. His notes, which are still in the county archives, show that some bones looked like they had been worked on with tools like those used to butcher animals. The smokehouse gave the most damning proof. Dr. Hayes found cuts of meat that were clearly human in origin among the hanging meats that the search party thought were venison or pork at first. His report says, some preserved meat seemed to come from humans and were prepared in a way that shows knowledge of anatomy and how to preserve things. The effects were terrifying. The Stillwell brothers had been killing travelers, stealing their valuables, and, most shockingly, turning their bodies into food, which they then served to other travelers who stopped at their cabin. But the brothers were still missing. The search turned up no sign of Elias or Jeremiah Stillwell, which made investigators wonder if they had run away or had been hurt themselves. The meal that was left on their table was still a mystery. In April 1868, a man named Theodore Palmer came forward with information that changed the case. Palmer, a trapper who often worked in the county's remote areas, said he saw Jeremiah Stillwell on the 11th of December 1867, the day before the brothers' disappearance was discovered. Palmer said in his affidavit, "I was checking my lines up near Beaver Creek, maybe 5 miles north of their place. I saw a man on horseback leading another horse with a bundle tied to it. I knew he was the younger Stillwell brother. He looked like he was in a hurry and didn't stop to talk like he usually would. He just nodded and kept riding north. I didn't think much of it until I heard they were missing." Palmer's statement made it sound like Jeremiah Stillwell had left the property on purpose and taken food with him. This was not what happened at the cabin, where there were half-eaten meals and personal items left behind. Did Jeremiah run away while Elias stayed? Was Elias the victim of his own brother? Or was there another reason for the evidence that seemed to contradict itself? Sheriff Harrington widened the search to areas north of the county and sent telegrams to officials in nearby areas with descriptions of the Stillwell brothers. There were no confirmed sightings. As the investigation went on through the spring and summer of 1868, more information came to light about the brothers' past, or lack of one. It was impossible to find out where they said they were from in Kentucky. There were no records of Elias or Jeremiah Stillwell in Kentucky or any of the states around it. They didn't know anything about their lives before they got to Webster County. Because there was no verifiable history, it was possible that Stillwell was a fake name used to hide a criminal past somewhere else. Sheriff Harrington asked police in several states for information about other crimes or suspects that fit the brothers' descriptions. Another piece of evidence against the brothers was found. In the secret room where personal items had been found, investigators found a small journal stuck behind a loose stone in the wall. It looks like the journal belonged to Jeremiah Stillwell and had entries from 1864 to 1866. Most of the entries were boring notes about chores or the weather, but some had disturbing references. One entry from August 1864 said, "E says the stew needs more salt. Travelers don't notice any difference. Sometimes I wonder if they suspect. The well keeps our secret." Another letter from April 1865 said, "3 men today, Army deserters." E said, "Too risky, but they had good boots and a fine rifle. No one will look for them. They used the special herbs in their coffee." These strange notes not only hinted that the brothers had been killing travelers for years, but they also hinted that they had found ways to incapacitate their victims, possibly with poison. The mention of the well was especially disturbing because it suggested that evidence might be hidden there. Sheriff Harrington told people to empty the well and look at it. The job was hard and risky because the well went more than 60 feet into the limestone under the property. When the workers finally got to the bottom, they saw a layer of silt and trash that was about 3 feet deep. Several small bones, later identified as finger and toe bones, several teeth, buttons, a gold wedding band with the initials MH to JH 1858, and a small leather pouch with what looked like human hair of different colors tied together with thread into neat bundles, were among the things found in the well. Dr. Hayes looked at these results and decided that the well was probably used to get rid of some remains that weren't used for anything else. His report said that the fact that these things were still there showed that they had been in the well for different amounts of time, some of them for as long as 3 years. The find in the well gave more proof of the brothers' crimes, but it still left a lot of questions unanswered. The most important question was still, what had happened to Elias and Jeremiah Stilwell? By August 1868, the active investigation was coming to an end because there were no new leads and the brothers were still missing. Sheriff Harrington said that the case was still open, but resources were moved to more important things. The county couldn't legally get rid of the Stilwell property, which was the scene of terrible crimes, because it didn't know who owned it. People quickly started telling the story of the Stilwell brothers and their horrible hospitality. Parents told their kids to be careful of strangers who offered them food or a place to stay. People who were passing through the area stayed away from the property and crossed themselves as they did so. The cabin itself started to fall apart, and the plants slowly took back the land that had been cleared around it. The case would stay officially unsolved for almost 100 years, but people in the area had no doubt that the brothers were guilty. People kept talking and guessing about what would happen to them, though. Some thought they had gotten away with it by running away to the west, or even to another country. Some people thought they had been killed by one of their intended victims, a traveler who had learned their true nature and turned the tables on them. A third theory, which people talked about quietly rather than loudly, said that the brothers had finally turned on each other and their partnership had turned into a deadly fight. The scene at the cabin, with the half-eaten meal and the left-behind belongings, gave some credence to this theory because it suggested that their operation ended suddenly and without warning. No matter what the truth is, the Stilwell brothers and their terrible crimes are now just another dark legend in the Ozark Hills. The case stayed closed for decades, but it was still unsolved. The brothers' fate was unknown, and most of their victims were forgotten. If it weren't for Clarence Thornton, a history professor at Missouri State University, then Southwest Missouri State College, who became interested in unsolved crimes in the area, the Stilwell case might have stayed a dark footnote in Ozark history. Thornton asked to see Webster County's archived records in 1952 while he was writing a book about frontier justice. That same year, while the Webster County Courthouse was being renovated, workers found a sealed compartment in the basement that held papers that were thought to have been lost in a fire in 1892. Some of these were more records about the Stilwell case, like detailed lists of the things found in the hidden chamber and a few pictures taken at the scene. These were some of the first crime scene photos ever taken in Missouri. Even though the photos had gotten worse, they still showed the inside of the cabin, the dug-up tunnel, and the pile of personal items. One picture that was especially disturbing showed the inside of the smokehouse with its hanging meats, which were not yet known to be what they really were. The clinical distance of the black and white picture made it even more disturbing to see it knowing what it really showed. Thornton also found letters between Sheriff Harrington and officials in other states that weren't in the official case file. The most important thing he found was a letter from the sheriff of Daviess County, Kentucky, answering Harrington's questions about the Stilwell brothers. The letter, dated the 3rd of June, 1868, said, "There is no record of the Stilwell brothers as described. However, a case from 1861 has similar patterns." Brothers Ezekiel and Joshua Hartley disappeared after being accused of robbing graves and poisoning customers at their roadside tavern. The descriptions match your suspects. Ezekiel would now be about 37 years old, and Joshua would be 34. Both were known for their unusual interest in anatomy and preservation methods. Joshua worked briefly as an assistant to a local doctor before being fired for unspecified misconduct. This link made it likely that the Stilwell brothers were actually the Hartleys, who had changed their names and moved to Missouri during the Civil War. It seems that their pattern of predatory behavior had started earlier and in a different state, which added a new layer to the case. Thornton's further research revealed more information about the Hartley brothers. Newspapers from Kentucky showed that the brothers ran a small tavern called Hartley's Rest on a road between Owensboro and Hartford from 1858 to 1861. People came from far away to eat at the restaurant because it was known for its delicious stews and meat pies. In early 1861, people started to worry when the local cemetery said it had found signs of grave tampering. Around the same time, families of travelers who had stayed at Hartley's Rest said they were missing. Authorities in the area started looking into it. But before they could question the brothers in depth, Ezekiel and Joshua Hartley vanished, leaving their tavern overnight. There were a lot of similarities between the Stillwell case and this one. Brothers running a roadside business for travelers, people going missing without explanation, and then suddenly disappearing when people started to suspect them. The physical descriptions and ages were also the same, which supports the idea that the Hartleys had changed their names to the Stillwells and were still doing bad things in Missouri. In 1953, Thornton published his findings in the Journal of Ozarks Studies, which brought new attention to the case that had been cold for a long time. His article, Serving More Than Water, The Stillwell Brothers' Reign of Terror, gave the most complete account of the case so far, combining the original investigation with what he had found out. After Thornton's book came out, an old woman named Sarah Wilkes got in touch with him to tell him a story that had been passed down in her family. James Wilkes, her grandfather, was part of Sheriff Harrington's search party in 1868. Family stories say that the search found more than what was officially reported. Grandfather didn't talk about it much, her letter to Thornton said, but on his deathbed in 1911, he told my father about a hidden room they found under the cabin floor. He said it had what he called instruments of torture and a chair with restraints. Sheriff Harrington told them not to put it in reports to protect the families of the missing. Grandfather said he never slept right after what he saw there. This story, which couldn't be checked on its own, matched up with some of the problems in the official records. The list of items found on the property seemed to be missing a few pages, as the page numbers went from 7 to 11. We don't know if these pages were taken out on purpose or lost over time. Thornton's research also found an interesting fact about the brothers' disappearance. There were 2 plates on the table where the meal had been left, but there were signs that a third person had been there. There was a third chair at the table, and a partial footprint in the spilled stew was a different size than either brother's shoes. People thought that someone might have interrupted the brothers while they were eating and killed them or made them run away, but it was still a mystery who this third person was and how they were connected to the brothers. Thornton's work made other people want to look into the case. Amateur historians and people who love true crime started going through old newspapers and county records in the Midwest to find any information about the Stillwell divided by Hartley brothers or other crimes that might be connected to them. In 1954, a librarian in Jefferson City found a newspaper article from the Street Louis Bowie, Missouri Republican that was published on the 18th of January, 1862. The article said that 2 brothers named Harlow were arrested for acting suspiciously and having personal items that weren't theirs. The brothers were held for a short time but let go because there wasn't enough proof. The physical description fit the Stillwell divided by Hartley brothers, which suggests that they may have used more than one name while they were criminals. Another researcher found records from a small town in southern Illinois that showed 2 brothers named Stillman ran a boarding house there for about 6 months in early 1863. They left suddenly after a guest went missing. Once more, the descriptions matched, suggesting that the brothers were changing their movements and identities in a way that kept them one step ahead of suspicion. These findings made the brothers look like cold-blooded killers who had gotten better at what they did over time, getting smarter with each new identity and learning from each close call. It seems that by the time they became known as the Stillwells in Webster County, they had set up a system that let them prey on travelers for years without being caught. In 1955, workers clearing land for a new highway, about 12 miles north of the old Stillwell property, found something very bad. They found human bones buried in a shallow grave while digging up a hillside. The medical examiner looked at the remains and said they were those of a man in his 32nd who had died about 80 to 90 years before. It was easy to tell what killed the person. A single gunshot wound to the back of the head. There was a pocket watch with the initials ES engraved on the inside of the case with the body. This made the police think they had found Elias Stillwell, who had been killed and buried far away from the cabin he shared with his brother. The place matched up with what Theodore Palmer said in 1868 about seeing Jeremiah Stilwell riding north on the 11th of December, 1867. Did Jeremiah kill his brother and run away, or did someone else kill Elias and make Jeremiah run away? More study of the remains showed more information. The medical examiner said that the victim's right hand was completely missing, and it looked like it had been cut off after death with a sharp object. This strange detail seemed more like a ritual than something that would be useful, which made it seem like there was more going on than just a murder. The discovery of what looked like Elias Stilwell's remains led to a new search of the area, but Jeremiah was not found. There was no clear trail left behind if he had gone north after burying his brother. There was never any sign of Jeremiah Stilwell or Joshua Hartley. We looked through records from port cities to see if there was any sign that he had left the country, but if he did so under a different name. In 1958, Thornton got an interesting tip from a retired sheriff in Pike County, Illinois. A man who looked like Jeremiah was briefly held in Pittsfield, Illinois in 1869, about a year after the Stilwell brothers went missing. He was being questioned about a suspicious death at a boarding house where he had been staying. Witnesses gave the man, who went by the name Jeremy Stilson, an alibi, and he was let go. He left town right away and was never seen again. This interesting clue made it seem like Jeremiah might have kept being a predator after he left Missouri, but maybe he was more careful and didn't have a partner. After Pittsfield, though, the trail went cold, and there were no more sightings or records that could be definitely linked to the missing brother. The Webster County Historical Society put up a small marker near where the cabin used to be in 1967, exactly 100 years after the brothers went missing. The plaque doesn't say anything about the brothers' crimes. It just says, Site of the Stilwell Cabin, 1863 to 1868. Scene of unsolved disappearances that haunted the Ozarks frontier. The site itself has long since returned to wilderness, and the cabin fell down sometime in the early 1900s. People in the area still stay away after dark because they say they can sometimes hear digging sounds on quiet nights, and the well echoes when nothing is dropped into it. The case's 100th anniversary brought back media attention. The Springfield News Leader ran a week-long series on the Stilwell brothers that included all the new information and research that had been done since the first investigation. The articles got people interested in the case, and a few people came forward with family stories or documents that added small details to the historical record. The descendants of Dr. William Hayes, the county doctor who looked at the remains found on the Stilwell property, made a very important contribution. His granddaughter gave Thornton a journal that Hayes had kept. It had more detailed notes about his findings than the official reports did. Hayes wrote, "I'm writing these observations down separately from my official report because they are too disturbing for public consumption." The way the human remains were prepared in the smokehouse shows that the brothers had specialized knowledge. Most disturbingly, there is evidence that the selection was not random. Certain parts were clearly preferred over others, which suggests that the brothers' eating habits were ritualistic or preferential. These private notes confirmed what many people thought, but few were willing to say out loud. The Stilwell brothers didn't just kill and rob their victims. They also processed and ate their remains in a planned way, which suggests a level of depravity beyond just killing for money. The meat was not just cut off the bone. It was also processed in ways that you would expect from a trained butcher or doctor. It looks like some organs were carefully taken out and kept apart. Harold Weston, a retired postal worker, gave a box of his great-grandfather Thomas Weston's personal papers to the Webster County Historical Society in 1968. Thomas Weston had found the abandoned cabin. One of these was a diary that Thomas Weston had kept in his later years. A shocking confession was made in an entry from the 17th of April, 1882. "I've kept this secret for 15 years, but I can't take it to my grave. What I told the sheriff about finding the Stilwell place empty wasn't the whole truth. I had been there many times before, always alone and always careful. That last day, I got there to find Elias dead at the table, his face in his stew. Jeremiah had a gun and was shaking like a leaf. He said he was going to tell, that he couldn't live with it anymore. He made me help him load Elias onto a horse. We rode north together until we found a good place to bury him. Jeremiah gave me a gold watch and $50 to keep quiet, then said he was going to Oregon Territory. I haven't seen him since. May God forgive me for my silence and complicity. If this confession is true, it answered some questions and raised others. It made sense of the abandoned meal and Elias's disappearance, but it didn't explain why Jeremiah had left all of his things behind. It also made Thomas Weston look like he was involved in a cover-up, which made other parts of his testimony less believable. Most importantly, it showed that the brothers were fighting, which had led to violence. Elias seemed to want to confess their crimes, but Jeremiah chose to keep him quiet instead of facing the law. This human element added a new level to the case, suggesting that even among such evil people, conscience could sometimes show up with deadly results. More entries in Weston's journal gave more information. He wrote that he had stopped at the Stillwell cabin many times on his postal route and often ate with the brothers. I never suspected the true nature of their stew, he wrote. God help me. I consumed it with relish, complimenting them on its rich flavor. How many poor souls passed my lips in those meals? The thought torments me nightly. Weston also talked about how he and Jeremiah talked while they were riding north with Elias's body. Jeremiah told him about their past, saying that they had started committing crimes in Kentucky after their parents died, leaving them with nothing. What had begun as stealing valuables from graves had turned into something much worse when they found out they could make money off of both the belongings and the bodies of their victims. Weston wrote, he talked about it so matter-of-factly, like talking about the weather or crop prices. He said they had perfected their methods over the years, learning which herbs would make travelers sleepy without changing the taste of the food. He seemed proud of how well they had done, how they had left no witnesses until Elias's conscience began to bother him. Weston's diary stopped suddenly in 1883, which makes it likely that he died soon after writing these confessions. His story was the most direct proof so far of what happened to the Stillwell brothers, but it couldn't be checked on its own 100 years later. Historians and crime researchers kept arguing about what really happened in the Stillwell case. Some people think that Jeremiah killed his brother to stop their killing spree. Maybe he developed a conscience that Elias didn't have. Some people think that the brothers had an accomplice who betrayed them. Maybe another traveler who found out what they were really like. The most disturbing theory, which is backed up by some evidence from the recovered papers, is that the brothers not only killed and robbed travelers, but also made a ritual out of eating their victims. They even served human flesh in their stews to unsuspecting guests. Dr. Hayes's original notes included observations about some bones that looked like they had been broken open to get the marrow out. This is not something that is usually done in normal meat processing. Martha Simmons noticed that the brothers bought a lot of strange preservatives and spices, which could mean they were hiding the true nature of the meat they served. A group from the anthropology department at the University of Missouri looked at the pictures and description of the bones found on the Stillwell property in 1969. Their analysis showed that the processing methods used were very consistent and showed a lot of anatomical knowledge. This supports the idea that the brothers came up with specific techniques over time and may have improved them through many iterations. Anthropologists also noticed that the removal of certain body parts seemed to be done on purpose rather than at random. They paid special attention to muscle groups from the thighs, shoulders, and back cuts that would be considered prime in traditional butchery. This selective method showed that they not only knew how to eat human flesh, but also that they did it in a ritualized or preferred way. The Missouri State Police officially closed the Stillwell case in 1969, saying it was solved even though there was no trial or clear proof of what happened to Jeremiah Stillwell. The official conclusion was that the brothers killed at least 21 travelers between 1863 and 1867. They stole their valuables and then ate their bodies to get rid of the evidence. In the 1970 seconds, interest in the case would sometimes come back when similar crimes were found in other parts of the country. Criminologists use the Stillwell case as an example of how isolated places and victims who were only there for a short time made it easier for predators to go undetected for long periods of time. They compared it to other cases of cannibalism and serial murder from history. Ella Lanar Phillips, a historian, found an interesting link while looking through Oregon territorial records in 1972. In 1869, A man named Jerome Stillman bought land near Portland and set up a small way station for people traveling to and from the city. The physical description fit what was known about Jeremiah Stillwell, and the timing fit with Thomas Weston's story that Jeremiah had gone to Oregon Territory. Phillips discovered that Stillman had run his way station for about 3 years before selling it and vanishing from all records. At least 2 travelers had been reported missing after being seen going toward his property during that time, but it didn't seem like any investigation had linked these disappearances to Stillman. This discovery made it seem like Jeremiah might have kept being a predator after leaving Missouri, but maybe he was more careful and more willing to move on quickly when people started to get suspicious. The pattern matched what was known about the brothers' earlier travels through Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri, where they set up camp in remote areas, attacked travelers, and moved when they needed to. Stillman sold his Oregon property in 1872, and after that, the trail went cold. If Jeremiah Stillwell had taken on yet another identity, he had done so without leaving any records that could be linked to his previous ones. We don't know if he ever faced justice, died of natural causes, or kept committing crimes under a different name. No one knows where Jeremiah Stillwell is now. If Thomas Weston's late confession was correct, Jeremiah went to Oregon Territory. There are records from that area that show a number of men who fit the same description arriving between 1868 and 1870, but none of them can be definitively identified as the missing brother. Workers found a hidden stash of documents in a wall cavity while they were fixing up a historic building in Sacramento, California in 1975. One of these was a journal from 1873 to 1878 that belonged to a man who only called himself J.S. The journal told the story of the author's life as a cook in a mining camp in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Some parts of the journal made me think of the Stillwell case in a bad way. The author talked about special ways to cook meat and secret ingredients that made his stews taste really good. He said that miners sometimes went missing from the camp, but this happened a lot and was rarely looked into in depth. An entry from 1877 said, "Sometimes I miss E in our cabin in the hills." He was weak at the end, but for years we perfected our craft together. The guests never suspected what nourishment they received at our table. Here I must be more cautious, but the opportunities remain plentiful. Some researchers think this journal shows that Jeremiah Stillwell kept killing people in California after leaving Oregon, even though it couldn't be definitively linked to him. The similarities were too strong to ignore. In October 1878, the journal stopped suddenly, and there was no sign of what happened to the author. The Stillwell case is one of the worst things that ever happened in Ozark history. It was a story of being alone on the frontier, taking advantage of others, and unimaginable horror hidden by simple kindness. It reminds us that in the huge wilderness of America after the Civil War, every time a traveler stopped, they put their lives in the hands of people they didn't know. Today, the land where the Stillwell cabin used to be is private property that no one visits or marks. Local sources say that the well was filled in during the 1970 seconds after a number of animals were found dead nearby. It seems that something from the soil around the well was getting into the water and making it dirty. The road that used to lead travelers to the brothers' door has been rerouted for a long time. The old path is now just a dip in the forest floor. Nature has taken back the places where these terrible things happened and covered them with new growth. But the earth remembers what happened there, even if people forget. The Webster County Historical Society did an archaeological survey of the Stillwell property in 1,980 inches, the hopes of finding more evidence that could help answer some of the questions that were still unanswered. The foundation of the cabin was still there, as were the ruins of the root cellar and smokehouse that had fallen down. Excavation didn't reveal many new things, but soil samples taken from around the well showed an unusually high number of human bone fragments. This suggests that the brothers had been throwing away bodies there for a long time. The archaeologists also found signs of a pit that had never been seen before, about 50 yards behind the smokehouse. It had a layer of ash and charred bone fragments in it, which showed that some remains had been burned instead of being processed or buried. These results backed up the brothers' careful way of getting rid of evidence. It seems that they used different ways to get rid of the bodies. such as processing some for food, burying others, burning some, and throwing some in the well. This means that it is unlikely that all of their victims will ever be found or identified. The archaeologists also found a small tin box buried under what used to be the hearth of the cabin. There was a daguerreotype picture inside of two young men standing next to an older couple who were probably their parents. It said on the back, Ezekiel and Joshua Hartley with mother and father, 1848. This confirmed the brothers' original identities and gave us the only picture of them. The picture showed two normal-looking young men. Ezekiel, later Elias, had a serious look on his face, and Joshua, later Jeremiah, had what looked like a small smile. Their looks gave no hint of the evil they would later show, which is a reminder that monsters often have ordinary faces. In a final creepy twist to this story, a historian looking into Missouri Civil War records in 1961 found that a Union patrol had stopped at a cabin that was in the same place as the Stillwell property in October 1863, not long after the brothers had moved there. The report from the patrol leader said that they had accepted a meal from two Kentucky men recently settled. And it also said that 3 of his men got sick afterward, but they all got better. Was this an early, failed attempt by the brothers to get victims? If that's the case, it means that their methods changed over time, becoming more effective and leaving fewer survivors to raise the alarm. Lieutenant James Moley, the leader of the patrol, said that the brothers were surprisingly friendly given the tensions in the area. He also said that their cabin seemed unusually well furnished for men who had just moved in. He talked about a meal of hearty stew with meat of indeterminate origin and noticed that the brothers looked disappointed when the patrol said they would keep going instead of camping for the night. This story, along with what we know about the brothers' past in Kentucky, suggests that they came to Missouri with plans to kill people and didn't waste any time trying to continue their violent behavior. The fact that the patrol members lived might mean that the brothers were still working on the herbs or poisons they used later to hurt their victims. In 1985, a PhD student studying the psychology of criminals in the past talked to some older people in Webster County who had heard stories about the Stillwell brothers when they were kids. A common theme in these stories was that the brothers seemed to be interested in herbal remedies and folk medicine. At the time of the interview, Martha Apprentice was 93 years old. She remembered stories her grandmother had told her. Grandma said the younger brother would come to town asking about plants that grow in these hills. He was especially interested in ones that made him sleepy or confused. He said it was to help with his brother's headaches, but people later wondered if they weren't using those plants on their visitors. The brothers' interest in plants that could be used as medicine or poison fit with what was known about them. Before being fired, Joshua Hartley worked as a doctor's assistant in Kentucky for a short time. This could have taught him about anatomy and drugs. The brothers might have used what they learned in school and what they learned from the people in their area to come up with ways to subdue their victims without a fight. When looking at the brothers' buying habits at Martha Simmons's general store, it was clear that they regularly bought herbs and other things that, when mixed together, could make sedative compounds. People could have made drinks that would make travelers sleepy or compliant out of things like valerian root, some kinds of mushrooms, and a lot of alcohol. The Stillwell case is scary not only because of what we know, but also because of what we don't know. How many travelers just disappeared on those lonely Ozark roads, never to be linked to the murderous brothers? How many families never found out what happened to loved ones who went on trips and never came back? And maybe somewhere descendants of Jeremiah Stillwell still live, not knowing about the dark legacy of their ancestor or keeping their own secrets. In 1992, the case got a lot of attention again when a true crime writer published The Stillwell Brothers, America's Forgotten Predators, which looked at the case in depth and included all the evidence and theories that were known at the time. The book became a bestseller in the area and got a new generation interested in the case. After the book came out, a woman from Northern California got in touch with the author to share an interesting family story. In the late 1872, her great-grandfather ran a boarding house in Sacramento. One of his tenants was a middle-aged man who worked as a cook at different places around the city. People said that this man, who went by the name John Smith, was polite, but kept to himself. Family stories say that Smith died suddenly in 1879 from what looked like a stroke. The owner of the boarding house found a locked trunk in Smith's room that had a lot of personal items in it, like watches, rings, and other valuables that didn't seem to fit with Smith's simple life. There was also a journal in the trunk that the boarding house owner found so disturbing that he burned it after reading only a few pages. The woman thought that John Smith might have been Jeremiah Stilwell in his last form because of the time and description. This link can't be proven, but it could be a plausible end to Jeremiah's story. He died in California without anyone knowing who he was or what terrible things he did. This account suggests that Jeremiah Stilwell avoided justice for most of his life and took the full truth of his crimes with him when he died. The known victims are only those who could be linked to the brothers by the evidence found at their Missouri cabin. This is probably only a small part of the brothers' total victims in many states and identities. Even though the well is full of dirt, you can still hear the water. In places where such darkness used to live, the whispers of the past never really go away. For those who know the story, driving through the Missouri Ozarks still gives them a shiver of awareness, a reminder that not all who welcomed tired travelers did so with good intentions. The Stilwell case got a lot of attention in 2004 when it was featured on an episode of a popular TV show about historical crimes. Historians, criminologists, and descendants of people from Webster County who were involved in the original investigation were interviewed on the show. One part that really hit home was about an old woman whose great-grandfather went missing while traveling through Missouri in 1866. His name was found in the Stilwell Ledger, which confirmed a family suspicion that had been around for generations. "All these years we wondered what happened to him," she said. "Now we know, but the truth is worse than anything we could have imagined." The Stilwell brothers' crimes were shocking, but they were possible because of the way things were at the time and place. The post-Civil War frontier was a great place for predators to live because it was isolated, had people coming and going, had little law enforcement, and was a chaotic place where people were rebuilding after war. Travelers often had to depend on the kindness of strangers, which made them vulnerable, and the brothers took advantage of this weakness without mercy. The way they did things, giving tired travelers food and shelter, using the remains of their victims as food for future victims, and collecting trophies in their secret chamber, shows a level of depravity that goes beyond just wanting money. The brothers definitely made money by stealing from their victims, but it seems like they got more pleasure from being able to control life and death and from knowing what they were serving their guests. Criminologists who have looked into the case say that the brothers' actions show signs of what would now be called serial killing, but with practical parts that are not common in modern cases. Their choice of travelers as victims shows that they knew how to spot opportunities and avoid risks, which is how they were able to stay hidden for years. The fact that they fed the remains of their victims to other travelers makes the case even more psychologically complex, which still bothers those who study it. Was this a practical way to get rid of evidence, a sick joke, or something more like a ritual? The brothers did not leave any clear reasons for their actions, so researchers have to guess based on what they did and the few writings that are still around. As an example of historical serial murder and how different environmental factors can affect criminal behavior, the Stilwell case is now taught in criminology classes. The victims were only there for a short time, and the forensic tools of the time were not very good, which made it hard to recreate the scene today. But the basic horror of the case will never change: the breaking of the sacred trust between host and guest, the taking advantage of people's weaknesses, and the discovery that monsters often look like people, giving water to the thirsty and rest to the tired, while hiding unimaginable darkness inside. Nature has taken back the land where the Stilwell cabin used to be. The physical proof of their crimes has long since rotted away or been taken away. But the story lives on, a warning tale passed down through the years that shows how people can be both kind and cruel. And somewhere in the Missouri Ozarks, where the old road used to go, travelers still sometimes feel uneasy for no reason, as if the land itself remembers what happened there. Brothers who served more than water to tired travelers, whose true legacy was written in blood and bone instead of history books. For those who know the story, the lesson is still clear. Not everyone who offers to help you out of a storm has good intentions. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who smile and invite you in from the cold, promising you a warm meal and a place to sleep.